Well, good morning, everybody. It is the first day of July, 2025. You're listening to Global Affairs Unfiltered with me, Jack Stockwell, simulcasting between the stream at YouTube as well as X and also at K Talk down in Utah County. Um, my goodness, where are we going to start this morning? I have been up for quite a while trying to go through all of the news sources that I employ, trying to figure out what to bring to you that not only will be informative, but interesting and entertaining. And I hate to think of the need for world horror and terror to be entertaining, but I can't take my eye off of this potential for the elimination of human life on this planet. And in so doing, I've got several things I want to cover today. With the fact that there's still a lot of hope out there, hope that people will finally come to their senses and do something about this. I don't look for Congress to do that. There's only one person in the House that seems to have any true sense of self and integrity, Thomas Massie, and Trump has already announced he's going to go after Massie in the primaries. And I can't think of a whole lot in the Senate that isn't beholding to Israel to some degree or another. Now, this thing in Israel and Iran that's kind of on a hiatus at the moment so that Israel can reload. And I want to get into the depth of destruction that has occurred in Israel. That, if you take a picture on the street in Israel today of a bombed out building that resulted that way from a missile from Iran, you can be picked up and taken straight to jail. No habeas corpus. They'll just pick you up and take you straight to jail. You're not getting the true picture of what's happened there. And the fact that Trump intervened when he did was to stop the slaughter of Israel. But I'll get to that more in the program, because this was never about Iran's nuclear weapons. And I want to keep your mind on the target. Because while the Western media is filled with all the leaks and all the counter leaks about the whereabouts of over 400 kilograms of enriched uranium, that's the 60%er stuff. And whether or not Iran's centrifuges that would be used to enrich it were destroyed or not, what is becoming clear is that no one really cared about that. That was all the fluff. Whatever you see being bantered around on the major news media is to take your attention off of what is really going on. And again, I have to employ one of my favorite sayings from Mark Twain: if you miss the morning news, you are ill-informed. If you catch the evening news, you're misinformed. And that goes along with what I'm saying about whatever is the common banter taking place on these radio or TV programs or whatever else. Whoever picks up that major theme, that the 10,000 cows can't be wrong kind of an idea. It's the one or two cows that question what the other 9,998 are doing that I'm interested in. And so if the negotiations had continued and the United States would have made an agreement, a deal, the art of the deal, probably brokered by Russia with Iran to allow Iran to the peaceful development of nuclear energy for their nuclear power plants, while guaranteeing the security of Israel, we wouldn't be having these people murdered and killed in their beds. Now, instead, President Trump apparently lied to the world, pretending that he had told Bibi Netanyahu to hold off on the bombing of Iran during the ongoing negotiations, only to enable Israel to put together this surprise attack that ended up killing dozens of Iranian scientists and military leaders in their beds, along with their families. When you hear about how these selected assassinations took place, it wasn't a drone that flew into a bedroom and then spied Mr. Iranian scientist and Mrs. Iranian scientist and left her alone and went after the scientist. No, the whole houses blew up. And on top of that neutral nuclear war dog, the International Atomic Energy Agency admitted that after the Israeli attacks and before the U.S. attack, that Iran wasn't building a bomb. Although the IAEA had claimed just a few days earlier that Iran had violated certain provisions, of course, just in time for to create a pretext for Israel's attack. And all of this hoopla about Iran has nothing to do with why certain forces are pushing for war between the United States and Iran. And the dynamic behind that certainly hasn't lessened any at all. So, Schiller Institute founder Helga Zepp-LaRouche, I just paid my monthly donation to the Schiller Institute, $50. If you can only give them $5, you need to go to schillerinstitute.com and give them something. This is one of the last sane voices on the planet that has been able to bring together saner voices in all these other countries that face nuclear annihilation as much as we do, who are standing up against the status quo and understand that the systemic bankruptcy of the transatlantic system and the unwillingness of the establishments right now who are in control of the dynamic of the Middle East and Ukraine to correct their policies and their insistence that they want to remain in the dominant position in this planet. And they don't care how many people they kill in order to do that. So the only way to be sure that we're not on the cusp of nuclear war, whether in the Middle East or anywhere else, is to eliminate the cause of the conflict by establishing this new economic security architecture that recognizes the right of every single sovereign nation to be secure and prosperous. But that will require the bankruptcy organization of the transatlantic system and the admission that the 2 quadrillion everything bubble simply cannot be saved. So what do you do at that point? I mean, all this political hoopla about how we got to balance the budget and we got to pay down the deficits. You can't pay down a 2 quadrillion deficit. All you can do is put it in bankruptcy. That's what bankruptcy is for. Some of you listening may have declared bankruptcy in the past. Why'd you do that? Because you had no alternative. That's why bankruptcy is in the Constitution. The word bankruptcy, not referring to the office of the president, but the financial bankruptcy of the citizens of this sovereign nation, have the right to declare bankruptcy. And the bankruptcy laws will pretty well be taken care of by Congress. It's one of their responsibilities. So while the world is obsessed with whether or not Trump totally or only partially or not at all destroyed Iran's nuclear capabilities, Russia is steadfastly, while all this is going on behind the scenes, winning the war against NATO in the Ukraine on the battlefield. Russia just announced that Lugansk has been fully liberated now from the pro-Nazi scourge, and no amount of weapons from the bankrupt Europeans is going to save Zelensky's butt. Not at all. Over 5 billion people on this planet live in nations which have rejected the British imperial system. I bring that up because of our rejection of the British imperial system 250 years ago this Friday. And they're forcing a new order, not based on a winner-take-all or a plantation master-slave type of relationship with these countries, but as Russian President Putin put it, more like a symphony orchestra, where each unique voice, each unique sovereign nation contributes to the harmony of the whole. So as we approach the American Independence Day holiday this Friday on the 4th, now would be a good time to remember that we have been in this ongoing brawl with the British Empire for more than 250 years. And I'm quoting now from a 2004 speech by LaRouche. "I stand at the bedside of a doomed empire" was the name of the speech. And just a short quote here. "We were almost crushed repeatedly. The intention of Britain was to destroy us. This was the perpetual policy of the British toward the United States and the policy of the key traders within the United States, such as Gallatin, Aaron Burr, and such as the leadership of many of the political parties. The controllers of agents, British agents, such as Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, Polk, Pierce, Buchanan, who were the agents of the enemy determined to destroy us. And in the process, the American patriotic tradition had a resurgence around the tradition of Lafayette, around the personality of John Quincy Adams, and with a very significant recruit by John Quincy Adams to his cause, the Whig Abraham Lincoln, who was Quincy Adams' voice in the Congress in denouncing the Polk presidency for the war against Mexico, which was all British-inspired, mind you, and that President Lincoln later led the United States to return to itself as a nation. It is time for the United States to return to itself and stop participating in these British imperial atrocities. Your children and your grandchildren would certainly appreciate that. Okay, some other things that caught my attention. I was going to say something about Palantir, but I don't think so. The leaks, the leaks and all the fatwas are the order of the day right now. And they're all designed to induce this ever egotistical Donald Trump. And I just heard him this morning on TV. My goodness. He needs an editor to continue down the path of self-destruction by, among other things, launching a war on Iran. Now, don't think this thing is over with by any means. That was part of my presentation yesterday. The Washington Post, that paragon of journalism, whose editor once announced on the editorial page that it would never cover American statesman Lyndon LaRouche unless it was to slander him, played its part yesterday in the latest post by receiving another leak designed to question Trump's assertion that the June 21 airstrikes on Iran obliterated the nuclear program. Now, the leak this time concerns a claim that U.S. intelligence obtained intercepted communication between senior Iranian officials discussing the U.S. airstrikes and remarking that the attack was less devastating than they were expecting. I'm quoting from yesterday's Washington Post. The intercepted signals intelligence is the latest preliminary information offering a more complicated picture than the one conveyed by the president, who has said the operation completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Now, predictably, of course, the White House went ballistic over this latest leak. Caroline Leavitt said this: "It's shameful that the Washington Post is helping people commit felonies by publishing out-of-context leaks. The notion that unnamed Iranian officials know what happened under hundreds of feet of rubble is nonsense. Their nuclear weapons program is over." Well, this is just yesterday, and they're still pushing that lie. But it's interesting that she says it's shameful that Washington Post is helping people commit felonies by publishing out-of-context leaks. Now, I'd like her to explain that statement, but while the Post postures itself as trying to clarify what the truth is about the damage inflicted on Iranian nuclear facilities, it's part of the media drumbeat intended to induce Trump to launch more strikes on Iran. There, I need to is it 20 after the hour already? Yeah, so they got a commercial at K-Talk. So then there's the right-wing news outlet, Newsmax, which yesterday published a story under the headline, Iranian cleric issues a fatwa against Trump. So I'm quoting now from Newsmax from yesterday. A senior Iranian cleric issued a decree calling on all Muslims to seek retribution against President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Grand Ayatollah Nasser Makirim Shirazi on Sunday issued a fatwa against Trump for speaking negatively about Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The fatwa came following Trump's June 27 rant in which he complained about a defiant speech delivered by Khamenei. Now, I heard it pronounced correctly here the other day, and I'm still mispronouncing Khamenei, not Khamenei. It's not Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. It's Khamenei. Anyway, who cares? Anyway, in which he gave this very defiant, Trump gave this very defiant speech, in which he refused to grovel before Trump. So Newsmax, I think I said that wrong. Trump was complaining about a defiant speech delivered by Khamenei, over which he had refused to grovel before Trump. So Newsmax does not explain who and how Shirazi is, but quotes him calling Trump an enemy of God, who is punishable by death under the Iranian Penal Code. So this, no doubt, is intended to get Newsmax leadership all riled up and ready to go to war, or worse, set up Trump for an assassination attempt that'll be blamed on Tehran. Now, I don't want you to go into your inner sanctum with your pen and your journal and write down that prophecy. But there are still assassination moves being made towards Trump all the time. Nothing as spectacular as having his ear pierced with a bullet. But there is rumble here and there that the efforts to protect him are getting thicker and thicker all the time. And when I see what Vance is doing at the behest of the president, just like today he shows up in Congress to pressure the recalcitrant Republicans to support the big, beautiful bill, should Trump be assassinated, I have every reason to expect Vance would step right in and keep the dynamic going. I have no reason to believe otherwise. I don't like talking about things like that, but that's the real world in which I live. And I would not be a bit surprised that if an assassination attempt on President Trump was successful, they would blame it on Tehran. And then what would Vance do? So Newsmax does not explain who or how important this fellow is, who I don't know how far up the power structure he is in Iran, but he calls Trump, of course, an enemy of God. Now, forget about Iran for a moment. What about Germany getting the nuclear bomb? That's what's the current parliamentary leader of the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, the current ruling power. Only by a breath of wind are they in power. Their spokesman, Jens Spahn, proposed in an interview yesterday in a German publication, Europe must become capable of deterrence. We need to talk about German or European participation in the nuclear arsenals of France and Great Britain, and possibly our own participation with other European states. Now, even if that were to quickly rebound into some defensive reflex, there needs to be a debate about an independent European nuclear umbrella, he said. He said, and that can only work with German leadership. He says Russian aggression is creating a whole new threat situation, and those who cannot deter with nuclear weapons become pawns in the world politics. So what's he not saying? He's saying Germany needs nuclear weapons, and that Germany needs to be in control of the nuclear umbrella for Europe. See, they don't even hide this stuff anymore. Germany wants a nuke. Now, there are nukes in Germany, but Germany wants control of the American nukes. Well, perhaps he's being motivated by some need to distract public attention from a report that was published in the last few days on how money was being spent in the German defense. However, his Dr. Strangelove like proposal has spurred a polarized debate going on in the SDU. And while he is criticized by the SPD, the other party, he got approval from the AFD. Now, the AFD is the alternate for Deutschland. It's the Trump. I've been referring to them as the Trumpers of Germany. They're the far right wing of Germany. And their speaker, and this is amazing because they were anti-nuke. They were anti-war. They were anti-supplying Ukraine with weapons just a few months ago. And now even the right wing that almost prevented Frederick Merz from getting into office because of their predominant position in the Bundestag. Their spokesperson said this: nuclear sharing of American nuclear weapons is in question, and there will be no participation in French or British nuclear weapons. A German nuclear weapons program is therefore the logical consequence. So here it is, the 2025 is half over as of midnight last night. And here it's just all the war talk, the constant ongoing war talk. So I think the world is still hanging by a thread, and all the different geostrategic conflicts still have the potential of erupting into a larger catastrophe in the short term. And of course, my eye is on Israel and Iran and the next wave of attacks. I have a list I'll go over. I don't know if there's enough time in the first hour, but certainly in the second hour, of all the hits, the destructive hits that are not coming out in the local press, of where Iran has selectively hit very important targets inside of Israel with their missiles. And they haven't even sent in the big boys yet, the big boy missiles. And so Trump goes and bombs these emptied out nuclear sites in Iran to stop the decimation of Israel. That's what was going on there. Israel was being pounded into the ocean. I got more on that before the program's over, but I'm quite convinced that this situation is going to remain so long as the root causes of the conflict, until the root causes are removed, which is the systematic bankruptcy of the transatlantic system and the unwillingness of these respective establishments, London, Wall Street, Washington, to correct any of their policies, and their insistence that they want to remain in the dominant position of this planet, which means that they're still motivated to eliminate the opponents. What's the biggest opponent to the established systemic transatlantic system but BRICS? Now, let me get into the scenarios, which right now the one crisis that is just a total powder keg is the Middle East, where I don't think anything speaks for this conflict that has been reducing in any sense the terms of danger, nor is there any hope that there is right now an approach to solve it. Because while there is a so-called ceasefire or whatever, the powder keg of a renewed possible attack against Iran is very explosive. And one thing which becomes more and more dubious is the change, and maybe it's not a change, maybe it's what was their plan all along, of the International Atomic Energy Agency for a very long time. But it seems that while this agency was depending, or at least objectively playing a neutral role for a long time, I think they have definitely evolved into becoming a tool in the attack against Iran. So the Director General, Rafael Grossi, basically said that Iran could rebuild its nuclear program within months. Just said it the other day. That some of the assets are still standing, that the centrifuges could still be spinning and producing enriched uranium. And because Iran is of a very sophisticated country in the sense of nuclear technology, one cannot assume that it's going to not restart its enrichment. Then he says one cannot indefinitely solve it militarily, and that has to have an agreement. Well, an agreement between who? That sounds nice. It's nice and sweet. Yeah, stop the bombing. Let's talk. But when you look at the dubious role the IAEA played in this last attack on Iran, I mean, the demand to just return to inspections and everything is going to be fine, it can't be believed. No one's going to believe what Grossi and the IAEA have to say anymore about nuclear inspections, because the Iranians have, correctly, mind you, to fear that if they let the inspectors come back in, and then the locations of the undestroyed facilities will be known, and who tells them that the IAEA is not revealing where the hidden Iranian facilities are that have not yet been destroyed? A seventh grader, an eighth grader can see through this. So Ali Larijani, you might remember his name, Larijani, the former speaker of the Iranian parliament, claims that Israelis had located a meeting of the Iran Supreme National Security Council and had planned to strike and kill the heads of the three branches of power and then assassinate the supreme leader, Khamenei. But it didn't happen. So he said they must have personally received on June 12th a threat that he had to get out of Iran within 12 hours or share the fate of the officials who were killed. In any case, the Times of Israel, which for the most part I think is a reliable source of information, but the Times of Israel claimed that the main reason why Israel attacked Iran was that they were deeply worried about a breakthrough in terms of the nuclear program that would have enabled Iran to build a nuclear bomb in a much shorter time than they had thought. Well, in any case, who knows? The Washington Post reported yesterday that the U.S. intelligence obtained intercepted communication between senior Iranian officials discussing the effect of the attack was a lot less devastating than they were expecting from this attack. And naturally, the White House is completely freaking out about this leak. And Caroline Leavitt expressed complete outrage when she was asked about this. So here you have the Iranians knowing, I mean, for the month of June, one aircraft carrier after another moving into the Middle East, one from the east, one from the west, one in the Mediterranean, one in the Persian Gulf. You have all of these K-135 tankers starting to show up. Why do they need to show up? What are they doing? That their job is to refuel bombers. Their job is to refuel jets. So Iran sees this, or Iran knows this. They can see these things starting to come together in a tapestry. They see F-35s being delivered in Turkey at Diego Garcia, as well as other flotillas coming together to protect the carriers. And then all of a sudden, there, the last Saturday, Sunday morning, whatever, on a 36-hour, day-and-a-half flight, B-2s take off from Louisiana and from Missouri, stay in the air for 36 hours, and they can see these things coming. The Iranians know what's about to happen. They've already removed most of their nuclear fuel from Fordow and Natanz. They've already removed the most serious of centrifuges, except there's some talk about some of them are so deep in the ground that there's no way that bombing could possibly hurt them. You see the trucks hauling stuff out of those sites before it happens. So Iran knows this stuff is coming. They know the bombing is coming. And then they get bombed. And then various U.S. intelligence sources obtaining communications going back and forth between senior Iranian military leaders after the attack are surprised to find out the Iranian leaders are surprised it wasn't nearly as damaging as they thought it was going to be. So then Iran's MEHR, their MEHR News, MEHR, their news agency, points out now that the IAEA, its hidden role in the war making, basically that they have become a tool playing a dubious role because they lied. They showed their cards. Now, this is definitely something I would really urge to be looked into more, because there was another discussion by Alistair Crook, one of my sources of what's going on, in which he again pointed out the role of the Mosaic software of Palantir and of, whatever military agreement, or the contract with the Israelis. As well, they're being used in Gaza for targeting so-called Hamas terrorists. Palantir's AI programs are saying this is a terrorist, this isn't, through facial recognition. Now think about that. Just think about that. Think, the Palestinians struggling, fighting to get out when the food trucks show up, and of course they're being shot when this happens. But you've got this AI program telling the IDF who's a terrorist. Now again, I want you to think about that. You have an AI program telling the IDF who is a Hamas terrorist in the midst of these people, and shoot him. How far away are we in this country for Palantir or some other devilish software program will identify you as a K-Talk listener, or those of you on the stream, when there's a few of you there, as someone who listens to unpatriotic broadcasts, as they would determine unpatriotic, and begin to take action against you. Now, Palantir put out this report on June 11 that was used by the International Agency, or Atomic Energy Agency. One day later, they created the environment where then the whole international environment, the politicians, the media, Trump, they all said that this was because of an unexpected breakthrough by the Iranians, that they were getting very close to being able to deploy a bomb. This is coming from AI. So then, naturally, Grossi corrected that on June 17th, but that's too late because that was after the attack. So I think the whole role of the Palantir program, Mosaic, and the validity of the IAEA in this whole thing deserves some serious investigation. Because I think without the remedy or without the reputation of being cleared of such valid suspicions, I don't think the Iranians will ever let the IAEA step across their border again. And without the IAEA being able to inspect the whole non-proliferation treaty, then the treaty's in shambles. This isn't a light matter. It deserves much of the utmost importance. Now, related to this, naturally, the ongoing escalation, if one can even say that the genocide still going on in Gaza, which is, the more reports, the more one reads about this. It's just absolutely unbelievable that the community should be so unable to do something about it. And there is, for example, a study which appeared on Harvard Dataverse, which reports open reports in the media. Get this. What have I been saying? I've been saying 50,000, 60,000 dead Palestinian women, children, and elderly, selectively targeted by the IDF. This latest study out of Harvard Dataverse, their own AI programming, that it's probably now hundreds of thousands of deaths of the Palestinians. I was missing the mark by a mile. France 24, another outfit that looks into this kind of stuff, talked with the author of that study and said that the figures which claim that there are altogether, you might want to sit down, 377,000 people who have disappeared in Gaza. So that, and then the other sources of it's almost 500,000 people. And naturally, the reports how this is happening are absolutely unbelievable. It's believable. It's very clear that there is this whole pattern in which the IDF is shooting every time there is some so-called aid distribution. The IDF comes, shoots the people who are trying to get the food. And when you see the major Israeli newspapers reporting this, and when there are occasionally leaked videos reporting this, it's very difficult to not believe it. I mean, each time 40 or 50 people are shot to death trying to get food from these aid trucks. It's a death march, like the Bataan death march. And they describe there is nowhere in this area of Gaza, there are no trees. There's no shade. The summer is extremely hot. There are no toilets. There's no water. And the whole of Gaza has simply become a death field, according to Haaretz. Now, I know Haaretz is a very left-wing, pro-communist publication in Israel that has an English publication. And the Israeli respect for the freedom of the press, amidst all of this stuff, allows Haaretz to get away printing what their field agents report. And they are now quoting Haaretz magazine or newspaper, an Israeli daily, where they're quoting Israeli soldiers who claim that they have permission to shoot unarmed people. And they basically quote some of the Palestinians saying that today they escaped being shot while trying to get food, but they have to go back that way again and again because they keep getting hungry and more weak and more thin, and they know one of these times they're going to get shot. Can you imagine living under circumstances like that? And then the article ends with this sentence: and nobody will be able to say afterwards that he didn't know about this. Now that obviously is the big difference to the Nazi crimes 80 years ago, because this is in all the media. It's in all the TV stations. All the world knows about it. You won't see this on American TV, but you see it in all these other countries. And why won't you see it on American TV? Well, who owns the broadcasting stations of America? Yeah, you're right. So naturally, this makes the comments I referred to yesterday of Chancellor Merz, that the Israelis are just doing the dirty work for all of us. And he meant it in respect to the Israeli attack on the nuclear facilities in Iran, but obviously you can't separate the idea of dirty work from Gaza. So now a big debate in Germany has erupted that that comment by Mertz is a violation of national and international law in reference to the attack on Iran. And basically, it is the last phase of a collapsing empire. Now, Francesca Albanese, who is the UN special reporter for the situation in Palestine, she's going to produce a new report because she wants to situate it in the economic benefits that the Israelis are having from the occupation of Gaza. And Mertz is ignoring all of these attacks against him. One has to say that this comedian, Dieter Hallervorden, I've talked about before, who's 89 years old, has come out and sued Mertz for hate speech and the incitement for a war of aggression. But this doesn't prevent Mertz to call on Europe that he wants to lead Europe to a new strength with nukes owned and controlled by Germany. So, I mean, the situation in Germany otherwise is becoming really such that, for example, I mean, even the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, Michael O'Flaherty, put out a statement criticizing the German government for not paying attention to the rights of free speech and the right to free assembly. There's more on that I could go into, but there's other things I want to talk about. But obviously, these Nazi-like policies are becoming a big topic for the Russians. And there, Lavrov, in a discussion he had with the Kyrgyzstanian foreign minister this past Sunday, June 29th, where he basically warned that the Western war hawks will not succeed in inflicting a strategic defeat of Russia. Now, we know who some of those war hawks are, like Lindsey Graham, Blumenthal, and several others. However, he clearly accused them that they are trying to do exactly the same thing again that fueled the Nazi movements against the Jews. And he also said that the Nazis in both Ukraine and the World War II era Germany killed people based on their ethnicity. He said the Nazis killed Jews because they were Jews. And nowadays the Ukrainians are killing people because they're Russians. And he also blasted Merz again for calling for the Ukrainian defense capabilities to be strengthened and for warning European countries against repeating the appeasement policy of the 1930s by negotiating with Russia on Russia's terms. Well, as you can see, this theme that the policies coming from the war hawks, especially in our own Congress, are in tune with the Nazi spirit. It's becoming a daily theme hammered out by Lavrov, by Zakharova, by Medvedev. In any case, I think the Western establishment can keep ignoring it, but I think that becomes a feature in the way as to how the Russians are looking at it. And I think it should be taken very seriously because for them, the experience of what they call the Great Patriotic War is one of the deepest topics on how they judge these events. And they see these things developing in such a way that it seems to be a repeat of what happened in 1920, 1930, when it came to the buildup of Germany before the war. So, and that's not being helped any by the fact that Estonia is now declaring they're ready to place the F-35 fighter jet, which of course can transport nuclear weapons, in their territory, which obviously makes Estonia a prime target in the case of the eruption of any conflict. And Kremlin spokesperson Peskov naturally said that this action by Tallinn in Estonia meant a direct threat to Russia, and he said it's an immediate danger that has to be taken literally. Now, you know where the Baltic states are. They're on the edge of the Baltic Sea. On the west side is the ocean. On the east side is Russia. And little Estonia says they're going to be bringing in the F-35 fighter jet. And it was also reported over the weekend that the Russian military action in Ukraine went into high gear because there are over 400 different things, drones, other things being sent. Only a portion of it was intercepted by the Ukraine. There were even targets fired upon by the Russians using these drones in the far west of Ukraine. So it's very clear that the sharpened verbiage coming out of Russia from Lavrov and others, and the military action seems to be going hand in hand. Now, they also report that the Russian armed forces have taken the village of Shevchenko in Donetsk. Why is Shevchenko in Donetsk important? Because it's one of the most important lithium mines in all of Europe. And this is being characterized as strengthening the technological sovereignty of Russia. And they also say that they already now occupy more than half of the previous Ukrainian territory. So Zelensky would be better off had he taken that deal that was offered to him by Putin in March of 2022. And what the Russians have said repeatedly, any future deal will have to be taken into account of the actual conditions on the battlefield. Well, what does that mean? Well, they're not going to give up anything that they've gained. And so the loss of territory for the Ukraine can't be reversed because the Ukrainian army is in an absolutely miserable condition. And that can't be changed. Even if the West is pumping in all the new weapon systems in the world, they're running out of people to fight with it. And I think it's interesting, or it's quite noteworthy in this context, at this interview with Ray McGovern. McGovern, he had just given to the Berliner Zeitung ahead of his upcoming trip to Germany, where he will participate in the Schiller Institute conference coming up in Germany. That he's been shaping up his schedule for the rest of the days, in which he had this title of an article, "The New Sleepwalkers. Are we arming ourselves into a world war?" So ex-CIA expert speaks out for fear of Germany. That's the article. And the article is now going viral in social media. It's very useful. Ray McGovern always is. Now, actually, we should not forget that the increasing desperation behind all of these seemingly insane political and military moves is the fact, as I said earlier at the beginning of the show, that the Western financial backbone is utterly bankrupt. And since they're unwilling to apply the mechanisms that are necessary to correct it, it can't be prolonged, it can't be postponed. Obviously, there is no remedy. Now, there is right now this ongoing de-dollarization, and there is an article by a new study by the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, in which they all ask all the central banks for their monetary policies. And basically, that comes to the conclusion that all these central banks no longer want to invest in the US dollar. That's not in the major news. And they quote an article from The Economist from back in April that this institutional flight out of the dollar would be a precursor for the coming collapse of the U.S. financial system. And that's what I said here at the beginning of this program. That's what this war in Iran's about. It has nothing to do with nukes. It has to do with staving off what could become a very, very uncomfortable winter for America. The Economist also reported in that same article that next year the United States has to balance a debt of $9 trillion, which is 30% of the entire GDP. But in any case, it's 1/3 of the income of the United States, so it basically looks like it's simply trying to control the ongoing disintegration of the financial system upon which America's finances are based. Now, I need to see. All right, we're almost out of time for the first hour. Now, contrary to this, contrary to all this crap going on in the Western political financial world, are the Chinese, who are out there courting countries Excuse me, I was reading some notes here. But Iran cannot obtain deterrence? If they weren't building a bomb, you know they are now. Let me just put it that way. Because this controlled attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, and by controlled attack, I mean the Iranians were told in advance it was coming. This is my opinion. I can't prove this. The Iranians were told in advance this was coming. Russia told Iran to stand down. Don't worry, you're going to get hit with some very heavy munitions, but don't worry about it because you've already got your upgraded fuel out of there. You've got your high-tech centrifuges. The cascades have been removed elsewhere. And you don't need to worry about this stuff. Just stand down. Don't shoot down their B-2 bombers. I can't prove that, but there is evidence out there that that is indeed the case. And now, in that light, it's only smart at this point in the game, because it's the great chessboard of Zabriskie, except Zabriskie doesn't have to win this chessboard. Those who are fighting American aggression in America's war with Russia in the Ukraine and America's war with Iran in Iran, they don't have to win this. They need to win it because Trump needs a win. Trump needs a very big win here. So I just muted my microphone at K-Talk, so I'll continue to talk with the streamers for just a couple of more statements because I think I want to take a little break. And I forget which one it is. Oh, there it is. I think what's going on here is to stop the battle long enough for Israel to rearm. And they're going to be rearming with American munitions, of course. They're in the process of rearming now. But they can't stop the Iranian missiles. Maybe most of the rearming that's taking place is to try to recover the Iron Dome, which most pundits who've said anything about it have called it the Iron Sieve because of all the missiles that got through. And it was a very simple military move in the first place. Just throw in all of the drones. Well, I don't see anything coming up on K-Talk. Maybe it's certainly time for the news to have begun playing at K-Talk. I don't see it playing. So I'll just go on here. I was going to take a break, but I guess I won't. The stall, of course, is to allow Israel to rearm, to get some missiles reestablished in their country, because as soon as this breaks out again, and they'll blame it on Iran, you know that, Iran has the muscle now to finish off Israel. And it's still the breakaway ally concept that Israel just goes full speed this next time, attacking Iran, to bring in the American military. Boots on the ground, sea involvement, air involvement, and this time Iran will be launching hypersonics that cannot be stopped even by patriots, which could very well spell the end of Israel. Now, in the midst of all of this, you've got this ilk out there of the millenarian, Armageddonist, dispensationalist wackos who are just chomping at the bit for this to happen, to force Jesus to show up and save the Jews at the last minute on the plains of Jezreel. To save Jews who aren't even Semitic. Do I dare want to go into that? I flirted with it yesterday, and then a friend of mine sent me a very interesting video of just how crazy some of this stuff can be. Because there are some 100% wackos out there who are doing everything they can to force the government to get into a full-scale attack where all the forces against the Jews will surround them at the last minute, and Jesus will show up at the last second and save their butts. Now, the annual Christians United for Israel Summit is going on right now in Washington, D.C. It ends today. And the founder and chairman, Reverend John Hagee, which to me denigrates the term reverend, coupling it with his name, is giving the keynote, or may have already delivered the keynote today. And Hagee is a leading Christian Zionist, if you don't already know that, one of the American Protestant preachers who've been organizing for a war against Iran for 25 years as part of the promotion of his and those of his ilk, the Armageddonist end times dogma that Christians will finally gain their salvation by helping the Jews in the Holy Land trigger the apocalyptic war through Russia, China, and Iran. Jeez. This isn't funny. This is my psychological response to madness. And the speakers list is replete with other fanatic advocates for war with Iran, like Mark Levin, Zionist moneybags, Miriam Adelson, a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, will address the summit today. A sprinkling of speakers from the Cheneyite neocon bastion of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy are on the list, and one of them is retired IDF Colonel Jonathan Conricus, who will expound on Israel's critical threats and opportunities. And then a U.S. District Court judge for Southern Florida is going to be lectioneering on, get this, why anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Why anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. A U.S. federal judge will be. Now, listen. Under the First Amendment right of free speech, they have every right to get together and do what they're doing. I'm concerned when a federal judge takes a position like that, but under the free speech thing, which is rapidly disappearing in this country, as you know, if you say something critical of Israel, you can be considered to be an anti-Semite. If the court says you're an anti-Semite, then you're guilty of hate speech. And then if you're guilty of a hate speech, you can be fined or imprisoned. That's what's happened to free speech in America. Now, with this meeting that's going on, that's been on for a few days, it ends today, No such meeting would be complete, however, without a British warmonger being a part of this, Colonel Richard Kemp, and he fits that bill. Take just three highlights from his CV. He was appointed to the Order of the British Empire by the Queen for his intelligence work in Northern Ireland in 1993. He was given command over British military forces in Afghanistan in 2003, whereupon he immediately put together an unconventional force of British troops and U.S. Marines. And they begged, borrowed, and stole equipment to gain intelligence and launch covert surveillance. It's on his website, he brags about this. And chaired the Cobra Intelligence Group, responsible for coordinating the work of the national intelligence agencies, including MI5 and MI6, during the July 2005 London bombings. He was part of the Madrid and the Bali attacks and a number of high-profile political kidnappings. And for that, his rank in the OBE was upped a notch to commander, and in the words of the Chief of Defense Intelligence, he had huge influence at the highest levels of government. That's who's speaking as a part of today's presentation of these Christian Zionists. Now, he is today intimately involved in defending any and all actions of the IDF in its genocidal campaign against Gaza. And that includes his attack dog style denials that the IDF is engaged in a killing spree. He is denying that the starving Palestinians are starving as they are being herded into the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's cages for food. In his assigned topic at this summit, what will he be speaking about if he hasn't already? Fighting terror, Israeli warfare, and international hypocrisy. So while we are here getting ready to celebrate the 4th, this kind of idiocy, this kind of craziness is going on in Washington, D.C. And I consider these people just absolutely nuts. I mean, I believe that people have the right to believe whatever they want to believe. But some of these people are just absolutely crazy. Now, I had a comment show up that, how do you know that? I got a little email about how can you say Israel's lost this war? Now, by and large, the American people are not being told why Israel agreed to a ceasefire with Iran. And yes, Israel was rapidly running out of its air defense interceptors, making it more vulnerable to Iranian attacks. But that issue is only of secondary importance. The real reason they wanted a ceasefire is because Israel was being systematically pulverized and needed to stop the bleeding fast. That's why Israel threw in the towel less than 2 weeks after the opening salvo, because Iran was decimating one target after another with no end in sight, so Israel capitulated. Now, of course, that is not the story that you're reading or hearing about in Western media, where there's no mention of the vast destruction of Israeli strategic targets by Iranian ballistic missiles, and that news has been completely omitted from the mainstream coverage. But that's why Israel persuaded Trump to find some diplomatic off-ramp, because the losses were beginning to mount up and Iran was not backing off or slowing down. Now, as I mentioned in the first hour, did you know that it's illegal to post videos or photos of buildings that have been struck by Iranian missiles in Israel? In other words, if you publish photos of smoldering buildings or infrastructure or military bases, you will go to jail. This is how the government controls the narrative and convinces the public that they are winning a war that they are actually losing. And don't take my word for it. There's plenty of video clips from Iranian newscasters explaining how government censorship is impacting the people's ability to know what's going on. So while on the one hand, I praise Israel's free speech, or free press, I should say, not free speech, free press, by not censoring what these newspapers, very critical of the government, are printing, but they censor the citizens. Now, this is what I'm quoting from an Israeli newscaster explaining how government censorship is affecting how the Israeli citizens are learning and understanding what's going on, and why they seem to be come together as a block. He's Ravi Drucker of Channel 13. We have to say that there is a bit of an Iranian aspect to the way we report missile strikes on our side. I'm not talking about the Weizmann Institute, but there are a lot of missiles hitting IDF bases on strategic sites that we still don't report about. And there's a clear reason for that, which everyone at home understands. But along that clear reason, it created a situation where people don't realize how precise the Iranians were and how much damage they have caused. We just know about the Weizmann Institute, that there are many places we don't know about. And the Weizmann Institute, of course, was hit. It created a situation where people don't realize, as he said there, how precise the Iranians were and how much damage they caused in many places. Now, remember years ago, when Gaza was sending missiles into Israel, a lot of these backyard homemade missiles that veered off target, some of them landed out in the Mediterranean, some of them circled back and hit Gaza targets, and how they were kind of made fun of because of the low technology involved with their missile design and construction. And we kind of, poo-pooed any efforts on the part of the Palestinians to effectively catch world attention and dissuade Israel from its constant persecution of the Palestinians. Then, this big attack that was earlier this year, the first big one from Iran, and they send in a 3-wave air attack against Israel, and they send in like 450 drones. And these drones are traveling about 100 to 150 miles an hour. And they're easy targets. Iran sent them up there to be shot down because they wanted to know where the defensive batteries were that were shooting down the drones. Now, drones are as plentiful in Iran as 7-Eleven or Maverick here is in Utah. Every corner, there's another one. They're not getting behind on drones. In fact, they make a lot of the drones that Russia uses. And so they send this wave of drones to expose the defensive posture of Israel. Now the second wave came in, the cruise missiles. They fly a lot faster. Several of them got through. But then after that, then they send in stage 3, which were the ballistics. And a lot of the ballistics are traveling well past the speed of sound and are very difficult to shoot down. And we were told by the press, Western press, none of these missiles hit their target. But we know from people on the ground who were filming this stuff that most of those ballistic missiles hit their targets, which were military installations. In fact, one of them was an air base in southern Israel that launched the F-35s that initiated an attack prior to that against defensive batteries in Iran before that one broke out. So they found then that the Iranians know how to hit a target. And so in this latest round, again, they send up a cloud of drones that the Iron Dome expends all of its missiles to shoot down these drones, paving the way for the bigger armament to get through, which is what happened. And I'm going to give you a list here shortly, an unbelievable list that I discovered as to how precise the Iranian missiles were in this last round, and why Trump had to step in and stop what would have been the fatal death blow of Israel. Now, the title of today's program on the stream was that, don't think for a minute this is over with, kind of a thing. This is going to start up again. The Israelis are going to blame it on the Iranians. But this next time, because of what America did, Iran just might finish off Israel. Now, bring that back around with what I was talking about earlier about these wacko millennialist Armageddonists, dispensationalists in Washington meeting right now, praying on their knees that this happens in order to force Jesus to show up at Megiddo, the plains of Jezreel, where Armageddon, the battle of Armageddon is supposed to start. Now, I want you to put the idea of the Battle of Armageddon forefront there in your imagination, where all the countries of the earth are aligned against Israel. The Israel that was kind of referred to there in Genesis 12. Those that bless these people, God will bless. Those that hurt these people, God will hurt. The big Ted Cruz thing. Now, once again, I want to refer back to what this newscaster for Channel 13 in Israel said. It created a situation where people don't realize how precise the Iranians were and how much damage they caused. Now, what can you learn from that statement? That Iran's new generation of ballistic missiles are abundant, they are precise, and they are lethal. And to his credit, this newscaster seems to think that ordinary people deserve to be told about these cutting-edge weapons so that they can make informed decisions regarding their own safety. Like maybe they ought to get down to whatever dock is left in Haifa and get on these boats that are heading out to Cyprus. Now, I agree with that. I mean, I know that this stuff is heavily censored. It's censored there, then it's censored here. And it's state-controlled, and its agenda-driven media is not going to change the way it disseminates information. After all, the media's objective is not to inform you, it's to shape your opinion. One of the classic examples of that is Fox and Friends in the morning. To get you to think the way they want you to think. Pro-Israel. Everything pro-Israel. And as President Trump has come out, and I don't know how he can get this out of his mouth, referring to Netanyahu's the great superhero, crusader, savior of Israel. But I'm getting off topic. What I want to show is that Israel did not agree to the ceasefire because it had achieved its own strategic objectives, as it says it did, because it was getting hammered and wanted to stop the bleeding. Now, I think anyone can make that judgment based on a short list of the key military, intelligence, industrial, energy, research and development facilities that were struck by precision-guided ballistic missiles that wreaked havoc across Israel and could not be shot down, even with American air coverage. Now, you want to keep in mind Operation True Promise 3 unleashed no less than 22 salvos of state-of-the-art ballistic missiles, many used for the first time, that delivered these withering blows to a number of heavily fortified Israeli sites that were regarded and promoted, and even Trump mentioned, the most protected military bases in the world. Iran's missiles blew through those defenses, like at every turn reducing their targets to twisted metal and broken up blocks of cinder. One weapons expert estimated that just 5% of Iran's ballistic missiles were intercepted. 5%. Out of every 100 missiles they sent, Israel intercepted 5 of them. Now, this is an article from Press TV. Iran destroyed the so-called Israeli Pentagon, the Kiryat military-industrial complex in central Tel Aviv, which is shown as a smoldering hulk in a few photos published on X. Despite being one of the most heavily fortified locations in the occupied territories, protected by a multi-layered shield of Israeli and American defense systems, the complex was unable to repel the Iranian missile barrage in the very first phases of True Promise 3. In Haifa, a precision-guided Iranian missile struck a high-rise building housing branches of the Israeli Ministry of Interior Affairs responsible for internal military coordination. The strike disrupted logistical networks and emergency response systems at the municipal level. That's coming from Press TV out of Israel. Now, Iranian missiles also took out the Amman military intelligence headquarters at the Gilo Mizra interchange near Hezliya. Amman oversees elite spying, I'm reporting, this is from Press. Amman oversees elite spying units such as Unit 8200, Signals Intelligence, Unit 504, Human Intelligence, and Unit 9900, Geospatial Intelligence. The compound also houses Mossad's International Operation Headquarters, Israel's regime's notorious foreign intelligence agency. This may be the first time you've heard this, unless you are crazy like me and study this stuff when you should be doing something else. Iran also struck the impregnable Nevatim Air Base in the Negev Desert with over 30 ballistic missiles, causing extensive damage that, of course, was not reported. Nevatim houses most of Israel's F-15s and F-35s, although we do not have an estimate of how many of those warplanes were destroyed. More here from Press TV. Other targeted air bases include Tel Naf and Ben Gurion near Tel Aviv, Ramat David near Haifa, Palmachim on the Mediterranean coast, and Avda near Eilat. Iranian missiles, including those used for the first time, targeted the command and control centers of the Israeli military and Mossad in both Tel Aviv and Haifa. Excuse me. On June 16, Iranian ballistic missiles hit the Bazan oil refinery in Haifa, the regime's largest fuel processing center, which supplies around 60% of its gasoline, 65% of diesel, and over 50% of its kerosene. The strikes caused significant damage, forcing the complete shutdown of the refinery and its subsidiaries. The Israeli energy minister later admitted the facility would need major reconstruction, estimating a partial restart no sooner than a month. A nearby power plant was damaged, triggering widespread blackouts. On June 23rd, Iranian missiles struck near a power station in Ashdod, triggering a powerful explosion and localized blackouts. In addition, Iran directly targeted military-industrial sites involved in recent Israeli aggression. Chief among them was Rafael Advanced Defense Systems complex north of Haifa, home to multiple factories and R&D buildings that produce key elements of Israel's military hardware. Rafael manufactures Iron Dome and David Sling missile interceptors, both of which failed repeatedly in stopping Palestinian and Iranian missiles. It also produces cruise and guided missiles used in strikes against Iran. Including Spice kits, Popeye, Rocks, Spike, and Matador missiles. And the list goes on and on. Now, I want to summarize this. In a little more than a week's time, Iran struck or obliterated the Israeli Pentagon, the Kiryat Military Intelligence Complex, the Weizmann Institute of Science, which plays a role in Israel's clandestine nuclear program, the Amman Military Intelligence Headquarters at the Gilead-Mizra interchange that oversees spying units, branches of the Israeli Ministry of Interior Affairs responsible for the internal military coordination, the Mossad's operational headquarters, wow, Israel's most protected Nevatim Air Base, Ben Gurion Airport, which is still shut down, the command and control centers of the Israeli military and Mossad in both Tel Aviv and Haifa, the Bazan oil refinery in Haifa, Israel's largest fuel processing center, a giant power station in Ashdod, triggering a powerful explosion and localized blackouts, the Rafael Advanced Defense Systems north of Haifa, home to multiple factories and R&D buildings that produce key elements of Israelis' military hardware, the Kiryat Gat Industrial Zone, a major center for microprocessor and high-tech military production, the Gav Yam Negev Advanced Technologies Park near Beersheba, which hosts firms working in cyber warfare, AI, and military tech. You get the picture? In just 10 days, June 13th to June 23rd, the Iranian military meticulously destroyed a sizable portion of Israel's most prestigious military, intelligence, industrial, energy, and R&D facilities across the country. Now, of everything I just told you, if you don't go looking for this yourself, how much have you read of this in Western media? I mean, had the war gone on for another week or two, if it was still going on now, the Holy Land would have been reduced to a smoldering third world wasteland unfit for human habitation. In short, this was no normal ceasefire. This was a desperate capitulation by an overmatched contender who quickly realized he was in a boxing ring punching against something greater than his weight class. And this is how Trump summed it up. Israel got hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings. While Trump was at the NATO summit in The Hague. That's what he said. Israel got hit really hard. Yeah, Israel took a real beating. And I think we should note that there is no formal agreement between Iran and Israel. No signed document, no explicit commitments on a ceasefire here. Ceasefire was brokered through back-channel diplomacy, primarily mediated by Qatar. A senior White House official and a diplomat briefed on the talks indicated that Israel agreed to halt strikes if Iran would cease its attacks. And Iran signaled compliance with these terms through the Qatari mediation. Now, Trump announced the ceasefire was a complete and total ceasefire to be phased in over 24 hours, although there have been numerous violations on both sides since the original deal was made on June 23rd. And there's still violations going on even now. So the problem, of course, is that the ceasefire is not going to hold because Israel and the U.S. see the truce as merely a way to buy time to regroup and prepare for the next round of hostilities. Now, here are some of the comments of Defense Minister Israel Katz, who said this on the Saturday following the ceasefire. I have instructed the IDF to prepare an enforcement strategy against Iran that includes maintaining Israel's air superiority and preventing the advancement of Iran's nuclear developments. Now, that doesn't sound like a man who is looking for a lasting peace or even a temporary end to the fighting. It sounds like someone who's already settled on a strategy of resuming the hostilities, just waiting for the green light from Bibi to put the plan into motion. Now, I gave you a size comparison yesterday. You know that the Ukraine, as big as it is the size of Texas. If you have ever driven from El Paso on I-10 all the way across Texas to Orange, right there on the border of Louisiana, the day and a half it takes to cross Texas at highway speeds, that's how big the Ukraine is. Iran is 4 times bigger than the Ukraine. And their stuff is spread out all over the place. Israel, on the other hand, is about the size of Delaware. How can Israel continue to exist against a Leviathan like Iran? Because of you and me. Because of our tax dollars, because of the billions in cash we give Israel every year, let alone the weaponry we give them. But the weaponry doesn't seem to have done a very good job this last round. So who knows what America is now flying in their big K-135 or the C-130s. My numbers might be off. The 135s are tankers. The C-130s, and then the Global Masters. Those things are huge, where the entire nose lifts up and they can put in tanks and all kinds of stuff. Who knows what they're loading these things up for the next round against Iran. But Iran has already demonstrated how effective their medium-class missiles are. What about their high-class missiles? What are they going to do? And what are they going to hit? What are they going to aim at? Now, Bibi, they're just waiting for the signal from Bibi to get started. Bibi, of course, is waiting for the signal from Trump to get started, and Trump is waiting for the first signal from Bibi, back to him to give it to Bibi, to get this going. Now, remember, this isn't over nukes. Tulsi Gabbard said they don't have a nuke program. The IAEA said they don't have a nuke program. Iran has invited, if you think we're hiding something somewhere, go to that somewhere and look. Because they were active, competing or complying members of the NPT, the non-proliferation treaty, which Israel isn't. Now, this is where it gets even scarier, because whatever the plan might be for the next round, Israel is already employing its top-of-the-line military weaponry and advanced air defense systems. And you see how effective they were. I mean, what other tools do they have that could be used to produce a different outcome than the one they just experienced after just 12 days of conflict? Because Israel only has 2 options. Either it draws the United States deeper into the conflict, which includes boots on the ground, or it goes nuclear. There's no third option. So whatever Bibi and his generals have up their sleeve, it's going to be part of a different force and magnitude than what you saw during this last dust-up. Now, this is an interesting blurb here from last Saturday's Times of Israel. After the U.S. strike on Iran earlier this week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. President Donald Trump agreed on a rapid end to the war in Gaza and expansion of the Abraham Accords. Israel Hayom reports, citing a source familiar with the conversation. According to the outlet, Trump and Netanyahu agreed on a phone call that the war in Gaza would end within 2 weeks. 4 Arab states, including the UAE and Egypt, would jointly govern the Gaza Strip in place of Hamas, and the terror group's leadership would be exiled and all hostages would be released. However, this is still from the Times of Israel. However, and you can get this online in the English versions. However, Arab allies have repeatedly asserted that they will not take part in the post-war rehabilitation of Gaza absent Israeli acquiescence to the Palestinian Authority gaining a foothold in Gaza as part of a pathway to a future two-state solution. But Netanyahu has flatly rejected any Palestinian Authority role in the Strip. Trump and Netanyahu were joined on the euphoric call late Monday night by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, says Israel Hayom. Saudi Arabia and Syria would establish diplomatic ties with Israel, and other Arab and Muslim countries would follow suit. Israel, for its part, would express its support for a future two-state solution conditioned on reforms made by the Palestinian Authority. Meanwhile, the leaders agreed that Washington will recognize Israeli sovereignty in some parts of the West Bank. Boo. So people who follow events closely in the Middle East know that not one word of that article is true. There's not going to be a rapid end to the war in Gaza. There's not going to be a rapid extension of the Abraham Accords. And there's certainly not going to be Israeli support for a two-state solution. So what's going on here? What is the point of this nonsensical propaganda that no one in their right mind is going to believe? Well, how about a little hypothetical here? Let's say some expected 9/11 type catastrophe was to take place in the next few weeks that had Iranian fingerprints all over it. There are people in this country who know how to pull it off because they pulled off 9/11 the same way. And let's say this false flag was destructive enough that the usual suspects on Capitol Hill and the mainstream media demanded that Trump take immediate action and bomb Iran. And if that scenario were to unfold, then wouldn't it be better for Bibi and Trump to be able to point to their recent efforts for resolving the Gaza crisis? Wouldn't they benefit from the perception by the public that they had been actively pursuing peace, but these peace plans of Bibi and Donald were interrupted by Iran's actions after a 9/11 type scenario? Well, of course they would. Now, that's just speculation. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know it's not over. But when you have hardliners like Israel Katz, National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, and Finance Minister Smotrich, and countless others in Netanyahu's loony bin government who believe that Israel must keep the sword raised to ensure that Iran does not recover its military capabilities, then a prudent person would begin to prepare for the worst. Now, keep in mind, a number of Israeli leaders have repeatedly stated that Netanyahu should finish the job. What does that mean? How would Israel, who just got their butts kicked badly in that 12-day exchange, what would Israel have to do to finish the job? Yeah. It's just an intentionally vague term that refers to the use of an atomic weapon. And in order to determine the probability of such an event, you have to ask yourself whether a government that justifies the killing and forced starvation of millions of women and children in their charge has the moral scruples to oppose the use of the world's most lethal weapon. We should all be somewhat worried that Netanyahu is going to do exactly what you would expect him to do. Now, before the end of the program, these stage lights are so bright I can hardly see the time. Okay. As of now, Trump and his allies in Israel, his bosses in Tel Aviv, are holding back temporarily the next step to World War III. And although Trump has negotiated a ceasefire with Tehran, it is, of course, only a temporary solution, not an end to the war that the United States and Israel started themselves. But the purpose of the ceasefire, as I said, between Israel and Iran is to rearm the Zionist state for another major attack in the coming weeks or months ahead. Obviously, Iran knows this. Iran is restocking. Now, the Iranians don't trust anything that comes out of the Trump regime. Why would they? I mean, especially after Israel attacked Iran while Trump claimed that he was seeking some new deal on Israel's nuclear program, even though he pulled the U.S. out of the previous deal known as the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the Iran nuclear deal that was conducted by the Obama regime in 2015. Now this is the moment in history that everyone in alternative media, such as myself, have been warning about for a long time, that a global war will begin in the Middle East. That's why they created Israel in the first place. And the Balfour Declaration back in 1918, setting up what would become Israel in 1948, has been there for this very reason. The world, I think, will remember Trump and the rest of his regime, which is staffed right now with Zionists, neocons, globalists as war criminals who secretly greenlighted Israel's attack on Iran. And the strike on Iran's nuclear facilities is no surprise, given the fact that the United States, Israel, and their allies have been working on this war plan for years. We know that what happened here a little over a week ago was engineered to a large degree under the Biden campaign. This wasn't Trump's idea. And once Trump was running for president, a new war in the Middle East was guaranteed because Iran is the ultimate target. Remember the 7 nations that were listed in when was the PNAC document? 2001. The 7 nations, starting with Iraq, ending with Iran, and everything in between. Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, leading up to Iran, Iran being last. And Trump is a man with this ego who has claimed in the past that he is the chosen one, a man who would easily launch a war and be the one who stopped the evil forces in the Middle East from destroying the land of Israel. This is why Zionists in this country and in Israel supported him from the start. This is why he got millions upon millions of dollars from these various agencies and pro-Israel concerns that ensured his election. Now keep in mind that Trump had dodged the draft for the Vietnam War 5 times. 4 times because he was in college, and the 5th time because he had heel spurs which is described as protrusions caused by calcium buildup on the heel bone. Now, in all truth, heel spurs can be very, very painful, but they can be removed. However, there are always remedies to cure that. And according to the New York Times, Trump said that over a period of time, it healed. That's why the heel spurs don't hurt him anymore. Now, there are those who assert that that miraculous healing of his heel spurs occurred the day after the Vietnam War ended. But Trump comes on as this tough guy, sending other people's... He acts like this tough guy. He hasn't done it yet. But I see it coming, where he's going to send other people's kids to die in another war that has nothing to do with our country or our security, but has everything to do with Israel's expansionist plans for their greater Israel. Now, Trump has claimed, and this is, he said it, we saw it, that he's chosen by God because of lunatics like the former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, an American Zionist who is now the current U.S. ambassador to Israel, wrote to President Trump that he will hear from heaven and that voice of God. And since Huckabee heard the voice of God, he clearly must be on something. But I'm getting out in the weeds here. What Huckabee wrote to Trump is in sort, an end of the world prophecy type of thing, the coming apocalypse for Christian evangelists that I've described several times. And by now the world sees that Washington is full of neocon warmongers and Zionist psychopaths who are ready to unleash World War III. What the world is witnessing is an insane regime in the White House willing to risk an unwinnable war for the state of Israel. And as I said, I voted for Trump. One of the things that I really liked about him is that he was going to stop the war in Ukraine, stop the war in Gaza, and start no new wars. And like a fool, I believed him. Now, Huckabee said this: your appointed servant in the land, saying that he was sent by Trump to Israel to be your eyes, ears, and voice, and to make sure our flag flies above our embassy. My job is to be the last one to leave. I will not abandon this post. Our flag will not come down. Now, although I have issues with Politico, they did publish this very interesting story called "Does Trump Actually Think He's God?" by Michael Cruz on why Trump thinks he is some sort of God's chosen leader who was put on earth for a reason. And Trump has been mentioning God even though I haven't seen any religious affiliation expressed by him before, and an absolute closet globalist and a capitalist, but he's obviously on the Jeffrey Epstein list. So this is a man who has morals of a questionable level, but he still says he's chosen by God, and the bullet through his ear was the big example of this. Now, Trump said this, and this is at a national prayer breakfast in Washington back in February, before the inauguration. Trump said this: "I'm supposed to be dead. I'm not supposed to be here. But something very special happened. Let's face it, something happened," he said 2 days after the shooting. "It's an act of God. God spared my life for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again." And then in his inaugural address at the Capitol in January, "It changed something in me," that he said at the National Prayer Breakfast. Now, the next thing that Cruz says is that Trump went from nihilistic to becoming messianic. This is new. It's not how he talked for most of his long and voluble life. He was always, it should be said, seeing himself as something special And he has always, of course, been notably self-aggrandizing when he talks about fake news here or some of the terrible disparaging words he uses to describe other people. He will rebound with something good about himself. But over the last, was it 10 months or so since Butler, especially since his reelection and the start of his second administration, Trump's outlook has shifted in essence from stuff happening and nothing much matters to something happened and it couldn't matter more. So there are videos on the YouTube. Someone pointed this out to me. I haven't taken the time to look at it yet. I don't know that I want to. But there are videos on YouTube that suggest that Trump is, in fact, the chosen one. Now, I wish this was a joke, a comedy, but unfortunately it's not. One of the videos, I kid you not, you can search this out and see it for yourself. One of the videos on YouTube is called 7 Biblical Signs That Trump is God's Chosen One. 7 biblical signs that Trump is God's chosen one, referring to Isaiah 45:1. It's incredible to see how many people believe this. Now, there are people who are good friends of mine, have been friends for years, who were in favor of Trump's election, and we would talk about these things before the election. Considering the alternative, there was only one choice, and that was Trump. And as I've talked to these same people over the last several months, some of them are still absolutely convinced that Trump is the man for the day and the man for the job. And some of the others are kind of like me, starting to drag their feet. He lied last Saturday night about the level of destruction. And where well, I know everything. Well, I don't know. I didn't know anything that was going on. Well, I know everything that's going on. There are other videos available with the same Trump is the chosen one propaganda out there on YouTube. In fact, a film produced by a retired firefighter, Mark Taylor, called The Trump Prophecy, based on a supposedly true story of Taylor's personal journey to healing. Everything changed in 2011 when he claims that he experienced a revelation from God that a new leadership, even before the 2016 presidential election, was going to take place and it would change the world. And who was that leader, according to Mark Taylor? Well, of course, Donald Trump. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And then the Associated Press published an article based on the same subject. President Trump offers himself as the chosen one, as they quoted Trump as saying, he is, quote, the best president for Israel in the history of the world. And they said he's the king of Israel, and they love him like he's the second coming of God, end quote. So all this talk and the people believing that Trump is the chosen one is dangerous. This is a man who is backed by Israel and his evangelical Christian base who support him, and some of these people would literally lay down their lives for Israel. These evangelical Christians, which may live in, a lot of them in the U.S. Bible Belt, they believe in biblical prophecies and the role of Israel in the end times when Jesus Christ returns as to the Holy Land. And they believe that reestablishing the state of Israel after thousands of years is in the ancient prophecies, and the Jewish people, which in this case is the Zionists, who are not in any way Semitic, mind you, are returning to the land, and that would bring about the second coming of Jesus. Maybe the Christian evangelicals or the Christian Zionists should remember what the New Testament says in Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. You know how certain people who propose a certain religious view will always cherry pick the verses that support their position and ignore the ones that don't. So I hope that Trump and Israel and his Christian Zionist supporters will wake up from this apocalyptic nightmare nonsense and look at the reality that a world war is upon us. And I'm not so sure that Jesus is going to suddenly show up at Megiddo on the plains of Jezreel out of the sky to save us all if nuclear warheads are used in this next conflict. I just don't know. These things worry me. Well, we're coming to the end of the program. I have a very, very special announcement to make about the work that I do in my clinic, and I'll make it tomorrow on the Health Show. And I think a lot of you would like to hear what I'm about to announce. But I'm not going to do it today. I'll do it tomorrow on the Health Show. And in answer to many, many requests that have come across my desk. And it'll be a part of our July 4th celebration. But I'm going to save that till tomorrow. Yeah, I know I'm baiting you, but you have to roll with it. Now, I think I'm right in my assessment of this. I really do. I think I've got a pretty good idea of what's going on here. Because of my role as a presenter, as one of the hosts at K-Talk, and also my responsibilities on the stream, but mostly because of K-Talk, because it's K-Talk that gave me the opportunity in March of 1995 on the Kay Henry Show to begin talking about what I'm about. And it has given great success to my practice and my lifestyle, and I want to return that. And I'll explain that tomorrow. Okay, that's the end for K-Talk. Now, for those of you on the stream, I appreciate your listenership and the fact that you participate. Those of you who have. This is recorded. It will play later, of course. But keep your wits about you. I have a great announcement to make tomorrow on the Health Show regarding policies at my clinic. And I think you're going to want to hear it. But all the stuff I've talked about today, don't take it from because I said so. I want you to study this stuff and research yourself. So when the day comes that push comes to shove in your own respective little world, like mine, you're not going to have to sit there and wonder about what you're going to do. You already know ahead of time. All right, I'm going to end the stream with that, and I will